Listen, it's not my fault 2024 had so much good game animation that it took me this long just to sift through it all. I blame the animators, and so should you. Anyway, hello, welcome. Here's all the best game animation that happened in 2024. As is customary, we begin with 2 dimensions and work our way up. And if it feels to you like the quantity of impressive 2D work in video games has been ramping up in recent years, I agree. Like, we got Sunset Hills. Look how charming that is. We got some excellent traversal animation in The Cub. We got this new feast for the eyes from Vanillaware, and you do not ignore a new release from Vanillaware. We got Nine Souls, a game that can only get away with this level of difficulty because of how carefully they've tuned enemy animations for readability. And we also got maybe the best video game crouch animation of all time from Diesel Legacy. You ready for this? Look. Exquisite is what that is. You have really got to be bringing the heat if you're going to stand out in a year like this. And one of the delightful surprises that did is #Blood. Produced by a small animation studio, born from an animated short, originated as a concept pitch for an animated series, which then, I assume, lost control of the wheel and swerved off-road into game development. This is one of the most animators made this games I've ever seen. #Blood is a dungeon crawler which strives to entertain you with animation at every single opportunity it can find. From the personality of Becky's moveset, to the animation of enemies and bosses, to the portraits in every conversation, to the abundance of silly selfie poses for taking photos, to the animated elements filling the UI of every menu. There is never not something on screen layering in just a little more animated appeal. Of course, that animator urge to constantly entertain with motion can work against you, and I think that this game does suffer from some of those over-animation problems in places. Still, it's not every year you get a game bringing this much Cartoon Network energy. But exaggerated action, extreme poses, and wacky expressions are not always the most effective vehicle for delivering visual comedy, and 2024 gave us an excellent demonstration of this fact in Thank Goodness You're Here. Sometimes, the funniest animation choice is perfectly timed minimalism. Not that I would call this game's animation minimalist, exactly. Every location is alive with bugs and birds and local weirdos of every shape. But this game knows how to use classic limited animation technique to squeeze maximum comedy out of small, simple movements. Just look at your primary means of interaction. This tiny little slap from this tiny little guy is funny even before you've seen how the recipient of your 5-finger greeting reacts. This slap would be so much less funny if it had a big Looney Tunes wind up to it. Instead, it's just this sharp little gremlin-y meh that makes unhinged things happen. And boy is this game good at comic timing. When you enter a new area, it knows exactly how long to wait before your character falls into frame. Sometimes even putting you in control of that timing without telling you, leaving you to stare at this mundane shot just long enough to try pressing a button, and then the people and the predicaments you encounter in this game are so absurd, and yet the animation remains simple, dry, and matter-of-fact throughout, and that mundane presentation makes the absurdity so much funnier. You can achieve a lot within a simple animation style, and not just comedy, which brings me to my next subject, the absolutely stunning Haunty. This game's animation is so well composed. Your little ghost, like most every character in this afterlife adventure, is a very simple dark shape. The motion on that simple shape is appealing though, and the simplicity of their little form helps them to visually stand out in these starkly lit spaces. Which is good because these environments are dense with subtle motion. Like if an ink illustration could breathe. Does that make sense? No? I have no idea how well you're going to be able to see some of these finer details once the video's gone through YouTube compression, but trust me when I say, play this game in 4K if you can. With such a limited color palette, and with this much intricate detail, it would be so easy for animation to just muddy everything with distracting noise. But every moving element has been incorporated into this composition with such intent and restraint. It's hard to think of another game that manages to look so simple and yet so breathtaking at the same time. One of the things that I love most about digging through the 2D candidates each year is that, of all the categories we're going to look at, this is probably where you're going to find the widest stylistic variety. And 2024's selection was one of the most varied spreads I've seen within a single year. Possibly one of the most impressive years for 2D animation in gaming yet. But even amidst this abundance, there is one particular game that somehow manages to stand out, and that game is Neva. Nomada Studio is a treasure. This is the same crew of Spanish indies that gave us Grease back in 2018, and it is very gratifying to see them scale up their ambitions, stretch out into a different art style, and ultimately outdo themselves. Every single animated element in this quiet, somber game is executed so well. It is graceful and flowing and conveys emotion clearly without needing a single spoken word. I don't know what we did to deserve a studio like this, but the medium of video games is richer for it, and seeing more gorgeous art from them just makes me happy. But much as I would love to continue soaking in this incredible art, gracious have we got a lot of categories left. We may never know if my self-imposed mandate to annually hunt down every single game containing animation of note for these videos has impacted the timeliness of said videos' release dates. Impossible to say, but I stand by this stupid commitment I've made because without it, I might not have stumbled upon like half of this year's finest pixel animation. Like, sure, I would have almost certainly seen the DLC for Blasphemous 2. I'd have definitely seen the bigger releases like UFO 50 and Animal Well. I'd have found Into the Pit and Berserk Boy, but I'll tell you what I wouldn't have found: Locomotive. And that would have been a real tragedy. Locomotive is a point-and-click comedy-adventure game in the tradition of classics like Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle, which you didn't need me to tell you because, I mean, look at it. There is so much entertaining animation in here. The characters brim with quirky personality, but even more impressive to me is just how much custom animation there is for specific encounters and item interactions. Even just random background details. Look at this whole loop of a dining car bartender serving this guy drinks. This is just an ambient background detail. They didn't need to do this. The game is full of little animated delights like this, just trying to add life to each location and keep you entertained. If you miss the days of pixel hunting your way through puzzles in those old LucasArts adventures, don't miss this like I almost did, because it was made for you. But speaking of characters drinking, that's not a good segue. Anton Blast! If you're a fan of those old Wario Land games, which Nintendo just apparently stopped making, I can only imagine how exciting and weird it has been to suddenly have not one, but two exceptional spiritual successors dropped on you almost back to back. As with #Blood, the Cartoon Network heat coming off of this game is intense in the best way. Extreme exaggeration, squash and stretch everywhere, big smears, big expressions. This animation is screaming at the top of its lungs, sometimes literally. It is loud and brash and possibly a little too chaotic for its own good sometimes, but you will be hard-pressed to find another 2024 game with animations that are this fun to frame through. Now, I'm sure that the developers of both this and Pizza Tower are very tired of being compared to each other, but it's just so cool seeing two separate teams with similar inspirations not only each deliver an excellent game, but excellent games that also contain some of the most chaotically entertaining game animation in their respective release years. Wario Land fans are eating good, and that's just not a sentence you get to say very much. But speaking of animation that needs to calm down, let's talk about Metal Slug Tactics. If you're not familiar with Metal Slug, and at this point I suspect a number of my viewers probably aren't, then I am thrilled to be the one who gets to introduce you. Because of all of the video games with animation that needs to be told, all right, we're impressed, okay? Chill, please. Metal Slug needed to be told that the most. This series achieved the status of pixel animation royalty not necessarily because they're the best animated games, but because they are the most animated games. They quite literally do not make them like this anymore, and it's hard to think of shoes more intimidating to try to fill as a pixel animator. But lo and behold, the crew at Lake Here Studio went and did the thing. Of course, tactical strategy is a much slower-paced genre than quarter-munching arcade run-and-guns. These characters and vehicles are actually meant to exist on screen for more than 10 seconds before they explode, so this game was never gonna bombard you with new mountains of mechanical eye candy at the same blistering rate as the old arcade titles. Plus, this isometric perspective also means that Lake here couldn't even reuse any of the classic sprite work. They're basically starting from scratch. And yet, all of the personality, the silliness, and the absurdly detailed machinery of a proper Metal Slug game are all in here and looking amazing. I hope this crew is proud of themselves, is what I'm saying, because they've pulled off a very difficult thing. But, of course, as I have said plenty of times, great animation is not always about heaps and heaps of highly detailed, eye-catching motion. Let's talk about Bloodless. Now this is a premise. An action game starring an aging samurai who refuses to take another life, so every one of her offensive options is non-lethal, just countering and disarming every assailant who dares try. But just look at all of the life in this environment. The wind, the water, the flickering lights, and all of this while using no more than 12 colors at a time. It's not the first game to use this approach to dithered shading, but it's such a neat trick, and a look that just would not have been possible in the old days. But all of that eye candy never pulls focus from the characters, and it's a good thing too, because at its core, this combat system is reminiscent of Sekiro, all about countering incoming attacks with well-timed parries. And this genre of action combat is extremely animation dependent. If the enemy's attack animations don't provide clear enough visual cues, you will not be able to react in time, and the game's challenges will go from feeling tough to feeling unfair. And that this game's animation succeeds in providing not only that vital clarity, but also some great posing and character personality within these resolution and color constraints is quite a feat. But let us now speak of HD 2D, which is still not a great name for games with pixel characters in 3D environments. We need a better term. At this point, we've had quite a few of these, and I do like them. It's a very cool look that these games have. But until recently, none of the actual pixel animation in any of them had really stood out to me. In many cases, it's been that new 3D presentation that's really doing a lot of the visual heavy lifting. This year, though, someone went and made a game with 2D pixel characters in 3D environments with animation that did wow me. And that game is Until Then. This adventure game / visual novel comes from a small team in the Philippines, and for an indie offering with pixel art characters, this game presents itself in surprisingly cinematic ways. It's hard to be playful with a 3D camera when you have 2D characters who need additional art and animation drawn in order to be seen from new angles. And it just kept shocking me to see how frequently this game goes for the more interesting angle anyway. That's not to say that the team hasn't worked efficiently here, finding ways to get the most out of the animation assets they already have, but in those cases where a more interesting angle or a unique pose or a wardrobe change or even a full custom animation would give a moment that extra little punch it needs, they go for it. If I were to offer some animator critique, I think the bouncing keep alive motion they've got on every character is a little too big, especially once the camera's up this close. And also, the timing on a lot of these animations is very even, with each sequential drawing being on screen for the exact same number of frames. Not a big issue on these breathing cycles, but it does sap some of the energy out of actions like this one, for example. But those nitpicks feel so inconsequential compared to all of the ways this animation is elevating the game's story experience. I think polychroma games are really raising the bar on what this pixel characters in a 3D space aesthetic can be, and I hope it inspires other teams to start exploring the possibilities in that space more thoroughly. But okay, enough retro aesthetics, now let's get really wacky. I go to all of the trouble making these nice, orderly categories for my animation roundup video, but some games just can't pick a lane. Can't just be 3D or 2D or pixel animation, no, gotta be a little bit of everything. What if we cleverly faked like it was pixels, but actually a bunch of this stuff was 3D? What if we layered on so many supplemental 2D animated elements and fancy shaders and such that it elevated our pretty good 3D aesthetic into something way, way more visually striking? No respect for classification. Anyway, this year is the fullest this rogues gallery of a category has ever been, so let's start pointing fingers. First up, 30 Birds. 30 Birds is a little puzzle adventure game heavily inspired by Persian art and taking place on interconnected lanterns, like a living diorama of animated paper, paint, and light. It looks incredible, and I love the animation aesthetic choices made here. The way the characters are always posed to maintain these distinctive silhouettes, the way their line work and texture all have this wobble that evokes the imperfections of hand-painted lines and splotchy watercolor. The way that each character's animations are composed of just a few unique frames, evoking limited animation techniques, but you'll also see parts of characters, or even entire characters sometimes, moving around with mechanical smoothness, as if they're being puppeted by some simple gearwork mechanism behind the scenes. Every now and then, it's just real nice having a game come along and remind you of how many unexplored stylistic possibilities there are to be found out there if you're willing to look outside that narrow band of aesthetic influences so many games keep drawing from. And speaking of eclectic style, now we're going to talk about Great God Grove. When limited animation is bursting with this much personality, it can be easy to forget how simple the animation actually is. Most of the characters in this absurd puzzle adventure comedy are just static 2D drawings with a handful of different poses and expressions. But those poses are full of character, and between the distortion effects keeping the line work alive and the malleable, squishy animation being applied to the entire sprite, the characters don't feel static at all. And then you've got the 3D characters. Still limited animation, just switching to a new gesture or a pose with each line, and yet still so entertaining to look at. Never let a relatively small art budget trick you into thinking that making something visually entertaining is out of your reach. Because with a little creativity, a dash of animation in the right places has the power to go a very long way. And if all else fails, you can still make a puppet. But we are not going to wrap up this discussion of hybrids without including the game that really feels like it was engineered specifically to appear in this category in this video: The Plucky Squire. This game would have been charming enough if it was just this, a little 2D adventure taking place on the pages of a book. But the fact that it is also a 3D adventure taking place outside that book and then switching back and forth between them in clever ways is almost too charming. Irresponsibly charming. The 2D animation is playful and silly, but not so exaggerated or high energy that it breaks from that comfy vibe of a kid's storybook. And once you're booted out into the real world, the Squire's 3D form is suitably adorable too. Simple, but in a way that matches the simple appeal of his 2D incarnation. The real star of the show here is definitely the premise itself and the playful creativity they get up to with this 2D/3D concept, but that concept wouldn't be nearly so fun if its animation couldn't deliver on that storybook charm. But enough of this category for criminals, now let's get realistic. Lots and lots of big contenders in this category, as usual, so let's not waste time. First off, in 2024, we got more Elden Ring. And I already gave this game its flowers 2 years back, but suffice it to say, FromSoft's animators remain very good at what they do. We were also blessed with some more top-notch first-person animation, like the weapon handling and the consumables in Stalker 2, or the variety of excellent first-person interactions in Still Wakes the Deep. We also got Suicide Squad, and listen, whatever shortcomings that game might have, animation sure ain't one of them. These performers and that animation team put in some darned good work. Gameplay, cinematics, all of it. And speaking of good cinematic performances, we also got Banishers: Ghosts of New Eden, which may not have the same massive AAA production value, but that didn't stop it having some effective cinematic work with some very nuanced performances. This couple has some of the most natural-feeling spousal chemistry I have seen in a game of any budget. Like I said, lots of big contenders, and I haven't even talked about the biggest ones yet. Let's start with Tekken 8. There is a lot to like about the animation in this ridiculous game. There are the ridiculous cutscenes, there are the ridiculous fighters, there are the ridiculous fighter intros, there are the ridiculous secret Easter egg fighter intros that only happen in specific matchups. But strip away all of that ridiculous icing and what you are left with is an extremely well-constructed cake. The moment-to-moment combat animation in Tekken is delicious. Solid body mechanics, heightened anime flavor, and video gamey exaggeration baked to perfection. I think the cake metaphor is getting away from me. I'm gonna stop. Perhaps the best evidence of how tightly crafted this game's animation truly is what players have been able to do with it. This creator in particular has made a bunch of these choreographed fight sequences in Tekken 8, and the flow of combat in these videos looks remarkably organic. Now, does the fact that a player can block out a rehearsed fight this stylish mean that Tekken's animation is better than other fighting games? No. But there aren't a lot of fighting games with animation systems that would make this kind of dance possible, and the fact that Tekken's can really goes to show how finely crafted its animation systems are. But speaking of ridiculous spectacles, now I get to ramble about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I heaped quite a lot of praise on Final Fantasy VII Remake years back, particularly for the way it took all of those familiar scenes and moments and rebuilt them in a way that not only recaptured those familiar emotions, but lent them even more nuance, using modern fidelity to bring so much more depth out of familiar characters. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth continues to do these things, and then some. Remake was already a huge game, but the animation scope in this sequel is absurd. Hours upon hours of very polished cinematics, with some very sly performance subtleties for the fans who know where to look. An extremely polished combat animation system, now with even more playable characters and even larger movesets and team-up attacks and, honestly, maybe one too many additional combat mechanics. Open world traversal, mounts, vehicles, so many side activities and mini-games, multiple date sequences with all of the characters, and a whole stage play with different variations for each date. Even the elements that were kind of rough in Remake, like the NPC faces in conversation, those are better now. And all of you can become frogs. This Remake trilogy dares to ask, how much Final Fantasy VII is too much Final Fantasy VII? And in seeking the answer, it is determined to take us all down with it. I can't wait. But, of course, sheer scale is not everything. And I realize that's an odd declaration to make when segueing into a Warhammer game of all things, but oops, too late, we're here already. Oh well. Sometimes a game's animation doesn't need to have required a medium-sized army to produce, and it doesn't need to break new technical ground or even really do something radically new. Sometimes all that it takes is an animation team that understands what the game needs and delivers exactly that. And for this game, it's the feel of controlling a Space Marine. I love the sense of size and heft on these characters. They can move quick, but you can feel the weight of each step, the force behind every swing, the impact of every strike. Every part of your character's locomotion and combat moveset has this beefy Gears of War sturdiness, but also these beautifully smooth arcs and exaggerated posing. Add to that some chunky hit stops, gorgeous effects work, and violent finishers, and you've basically got the perfect recipe for a 40K action game. Everything about this combat animation is tuned to make you look and feel unstoppable, and sometimes getting that core thing just right is enough to carry an entire game. But, speaking of satisfying mechanical movement, let's look at Satisfactory. Look, I didn't expect a factory building sim to land a spot in this video either, but darned if this game's animation doesn't elevate the experience. First-person shooters having extremely polished view model animation is more or less the norm these days, but you rarely see hand animation this appealing in base builders. But even more important than that, this game, fittingly, has some of the most satisfying machinery animation you will find anywhere. Like, getting a new assembly line constructed and operational was gonna feel good regardless, but it is so much more rewarding when you get to actually see all of these new shiny machines coming to life and setting to work, especially when those machines have some personality to them. Like, take this portable mining drill. The animations for just equipping it and toting it to the dig site already look good, but then place the thing and watch it unfold and get itself all planted and stable and start spinning up the drill. Look at that face. Most of your creations won't have this kind of personification to their design, but every machine does have personality in the way that it moves and operates, and it just makes the entire play experience all the more rewarding. But I think that's enough handsome machines for now. Let's look at some handsome animals instead. Black Myth Wukong. Ambitious feels insufficient to describe this. This game's animation has to support Soulsy combat design with Devil May Cry flair and God of War spectacle, and that's just a lot of challenging things to tackle at one time. I love Monkey's animation in this. His movement and posture are just great. This combat moveset is flexible and stylish, and the enemy animations are providing all of that clarity that you just desperately need in a game this punishing. I was already very on board with what the game's animation was delivering, but if they think they can butter me up by also animating these chapter-ending sequences in a variety of different media and styles, then yes, that will absolutely work on me. I love their willingness to be this stylistically playful, especially when working with a story this old that has been retold and adapted so many times. Also, this game lets you chat with an absolutely ripped horseman, and that's important because most games do not let you do that. But I think that'll be enough about handsome animals. Now let's get back to looking at handsome humans. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Performance capture technology and 3D rendering have come a very long way. Even so, perfectly capturing the essence of an actor's likeness and performance in real-time 3D without things dipping into the uncanny valley just a little bit is still a near impossible task. And that's when you literally have that actor providing their own physical and vocal performance. If you have a completely different performer just doing their best imitation, then trying to capture the essence of a famous actor playing one of their most famous roles goes from being nearly impossible to actually impossible. This rendition of Indiana Jones is not going to fool you into thinking that Harrison Ford is somehow in his 30s again, but good gracious, it is an impressive imitation.
You have any idea how old that was?
Honestly, the entire cast is fantastic, and the animators and the cinematics crew at Machine Games have done such a great job at capturing that 80s Spielberg feel. But also, consider this. Over the last decade, no game studio in the world has worked harder than Machine Games to remind you that Nazis are terrible people, and fighting Nazis is good. And the world could use a little more of that. But the impressive performance capture work just keeps on coming. Let's talk about Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2. No double or AAA studio in this business gives off theater kid energy quite like Ninja Theory, and I mean that in the best way. These are the people who cobbled together their own shoestring performance capture setup for the first game over a decade ago, long before that became a more common practice, and back when decent low-budget motion capture options were far less widely available. They demonstrated to all of us that if you knew what you were doing, made very smart purchases, and kept your scope lean, you could still get remarkable cinematic acting results with limited resources. Their setup is a lot more robust now, and the results they are getting continue to be of very high quality. Great performances from their cast, some impressively natural-looking combat animation that feels visceral and dangerous, and just a very high level of animation polish all around. Actually, as long as we're talking about teams working smarter and not harder, before we move on, I would also like to give some special recognition to Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth. Not because its animation is necessarily more impressive or polished than these other games that I've brought up, because it's not, but it is yet another demonstration from Ryuga Gotoku Studio of how much more you can do when you are willing to just reuse the perfectly good animations you already have. Maybe you don't need to rebuild your entire animation library from scratch for every sequel for no reason. Maybe you could just reuse some of those existing animations and put that saved time and money toward adding new things on top of that giant asset library you have been slowly building. Like, just as a random example, you could squeeze even more entire video games into your video game, which is already full of video games. This rigorous practicality has allowed this studio to produce consistently delightful and increasingly giant games on a nearly annual schedule for an increasingly large and enthusiastic audience. And especially in a time when AAA game development is proving less sustainable than ever, it feels like there's a good lesson in here. Anyway, we still got an entire category left to get to. Let's move on. Really brutal trying to narrow a list of these down for 2024, let me tell you. Let us begin with what I'm just going to start calling our annual Sonic the Hedgehog check-in. And wouldn't you know it, Sonic X Shadow Generations has probably the most polished animation we've seen in one of these games yet. Not the most impressive animation of the year, certainly, but this franchise's animation is enjoying an unprecedented streak of consistency lately, and historically speaking, that's a victory in its own right. We also got LEGO Horizon Adventures, one of the very few LEGO games to embrace that more toy-like, almost stop-motion style seen in the LEGO movies, actually treating these characters as being made of rigid plastic pieces instead of soft rubber. I don't know why all the LEGO games didn't universally switch to doing this a decade ago, but I'm glad there's at least a handful like this one. There was also another Crab's Treasure. As I've already said, Souls-likes are a very animation-reliant genre, and I am darned impressed with how well this indie crew managed to deliver a quality 3D Souls-like combat experience within a much smaller budget than most. Similarly, we got Rivals of Aether 2, a Smash Bros.-like showcasing a legitimately impressive level of animation appeal for an indie offering. We got Little Kitty Big City, striking a smart balance between authentic and anthropomorphic cat behavior to keep your chaotic antics looking lighthearted and just cute as can be. We had some lovely, punchy robot animation in Go Mecha Ball, some very fun, bouncy personality from Penny's Big Breakaway, all of these unique finishers in Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, some very stylish combat in Wuthering Waves. We also got the Smurfs' Dreams, which is what happens when somebody forgets to tell the animators that you don't have to make the random Smurfs game look this good. Ocellus Games, I'm sorry somebody neglected to tell you that. They really dropped the ball, but you didn't. But you could have. Also, I'm very proud to present the award for Best Run Cycle of the Year, which goes to Petite Island for this absolutely adorable 3-phase run. Look at this. 1, 2, 3. Too cute by half. And yet, even amongst all of this, I think a few games in particular deserve some special recognition. The first one being Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip. Some games don't even need to tell a joke to make you laugh, because the animation is funny on its own. Look at these dumb little expressions. This arm-curled idle stance. The snappy timing on this doofy little run. The total list of animations in this game isn't that long, but every single one of them gets a grin out of me. No other game moves quite like this, and this quirky aesthetic, simple though it might be, has clearly had a lot of thought put into it. Like the way characters' heads are designed to follow Mickey Mouse ear rules, always cheating the facial features to camera in order to maintain one of 8 specific viewing angles. It's a silly game with uniquely silly animation, and this kind of stylistic creativity is something I will always celebrate. But, speaking of weird little guys, Mario and Luigi, Brothership. I am increasingly here for non-Nintendo teams animating Mario characters. Not because Nintendo's animators don't do great work, it's just that these other teams like Ubisoft Paris and Milan, Next Level Games, and now Acquire keep squeezing even more appeal out of these familiar characters. This illustration-influenced character design is such a great idea for adapting this spin-off series' retro aesthetic to 3D, and I love all of the squash and stretch these animators are using. The attack combos are great. These level-up celebration screens are a delight, and these Luigi logic sequences are just inspired. I'm smiling thinking about them as I read these words into a microphone. The animation is stronger in some parts of the game more than others, but these two goofballs' personalities really get a chance to shine throughout. I did not realize that the developers of, let me see here, Octopath Traveler and Oculus Trip, really? Huh. Well, I didn't realize they had this in them. I hope they get the opportunity to do more like it. And this wasn't even the only Mario game with good animation in 2024, because we also got Princess Peach Showtime. Peach, as she is usually portrayed, tends to be pretty one-note. All Mario characterization tends to be kept pretty simple, but she's not been given a lot of opportunities to shine in a leading role. So I love that the premise of this game has her playing 10 of them. That is how you make up for lost time. This theater setting with Peach donning costumes with different powers is not only a cute idea, but also a very fun animation exercise, because it means that these animators get to come up with a bunch of movesets that fit the role that Peach is playing, but in a way that doesn't completely overwrite her own personality underneath the costume. It's cute, it's playful, and the choice to present the entire campaign as a series of staged performances provides them so many opportunities for adding extra personality and charm. I really hope it doesn't take 20 more years for Peach to star in a game again, because there's a lot of fun ideas in here, and I think she's got a lot more to offer. Both of these Mario games feature some excellent animation work, but the mascot platformer genre had a pretty clear winner this year, and that winner is Astrobot. Few teams on this earth can give Nintendo a run for their money in the mascot platformer space, but Team Asobi has been quietly building to this bombshell of a game for over a decade, and if you played any of those previous tech demos or VR games, then Astro Bot being this good probably didn't come as a surprise to you. Animation contributes a great deal to that success, and not just by tugging at your nostalgia with cutesy references to other franchises, but by packing this game full of its own playful charm. These animators have gotten very good at making these little robots act cute. But there's also an attention to detail here that I think people tend to overlook in games with this kind of cutesy energy. Like the careful balance between animating these little robots and machines to look bouncy and adorable while still maintaining the feel of the rigid plastic materials they're made of. Or the thought that has clearly gone into all of these little details, like what's the most entertaining way for this enemy to react to damage? Or what's the most visually pleasing way that this part of the level could transform when you successfully do the thing? All of these little polished touches are everywhere, and they accumulate. They make the characters even more charming, and they make the game world on the other side of that screen have a sense of tangible weight and texture. Team Asobi has spent the last decade consistently understanding the assignment even better than the people giving them the assignment, and it's about time their skills started getting more widespread acclaim. But speaking of big IP tie-ins and impressive polish, we will now discuss Marvel Rivals. Hero shooters, or really any game containing a giant cast of unique playable characters, fall within a loose category which I'm going to call animator candy. Because in a hero-based game of any kind, even more than in other games, character contrast is fundamentally important to the play experience. The entire point is to make playing each character look and feel distinct, even just in the basic ways they move around. And the more varied and distinct you can push things, the more unique flavor you can bring out of each character, the better. An animator who finds themselves working on this sort of project is likely to have a good time. And I sense, looking at this game, that some of these animators have indeed had a very good time. And I too have had a surprisingly good time seeing Marvel superheroes get the Overwatch treatment, complete with Overwatch animation polish and appeal. The gameplay animation is all quite solid, with tons of variety between heroes. These MVP animations look fantastic, and there's already a ton of them. And the fact that so many of these characters who have history together also have these unique team-up abilities, some of which are pretty robust gameplay features, is just an oversized cherry on top. I could go on, or I could put Jeff on screen. Now you're having a good time. Unless you've recently played some matches in which Jeff was on the other team, being very annoying, in which case you might have complicated feelings about Jeff right now. Please keep those feelings to yourself, because I will not abide Jeff slander in my comment section. Now, I've had you here for quite a while at this point, and I really appreciate you sticking around for the whole thing, but there is one more game that does deserve a spot in this video, and that is Zenless Zone Zero. Regular viewers of this channel might recall a recent-ish video in which I criticized specific aspects of this game's animation, and thus might reasonably be surprised to see it come up in this video as well. Now, I stand by my previous critiques, but if that video did mistakenly lead you to the conclusion that all of the animation in Zenless Zone Zero is bad, actually, then allow me to correct that misunderstanding today. Because as I did say in that video, the combat animation in this game rules. It is responsive, it is satisfying, it is so polished and just bursting with style. Every character has a fully unique moveset, and they are all full of distinct personality. Yes, this too is animator candy. Feast your eyes on these perfect assists. Land a big hit or evade an attack with perfect timing, and you are given the opportunity to swap in another character with one of the biggest attacks they have, sometimes multiple back-to-back. And the feeling of chaining these swaps together is intoxicating. The character animation, the speed ramping, the camera, the effects, it is all so expertly tuned to look cool. This combat animation work is some of the finest to be seen anywhere. I'd probably still be playing this if it wasn't strapped to a grindy gacha machine. Ultimately, Zenless Zone Zero wants to be eye candy the game. And even though that instinct to prioritize eye-catching movement above all else can legitimately work against them in some places, combat is not one of those places. And even if it was, let none deny, these animators are very good at jangling those keys. I think a lot of future action games are going to look at this combat and take a few notes, and if they aren't doing that, they should be. Of course, once again, as I hand out congratulations to all of these fantastic animation teams around the world, I do so with the nagging awareness that a considerable number of the people responsible for all of this incredible work don't have jobs at these places anymore. 2023 was a rough year to be working in video games. 2024 was worse, and the people to blame for that are definitely not the ones being made to pay for it. If any of you watching this are among those affected by these waves and waves of layoffs and closures, I am very sorry. Wherever you land next, whether it's still in games or moving on to something else, I hope that place not only brings you joy, but works harder to deserve you. But there, now you finally know about all of the good game animation from 2024, and I can start trying to catch up on all the good game animation already happening in 2025. Such is my curse. As always, if you know of some 2024 game with incredible animation which I neglected to mention here, no you don't. The video's done. I uploaded it. Leave me alone. Nope, can't hear you. La 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 la. See you next year.